Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. As you can see, I'm not in my normal setting. Because we've all gone back into lockdown, I thought I'd bring back my back to basic recipes for you. So here are a few really simple and easy recipes to follow using basic equipment and ingredients, and I hope you enjoy them. So, lemon tart, or tarte au citron as the French say, is one of my favourite desserts. I love anything pastry and lemon flavoured. It's a perfect balance between crispy pastry and a delicious zingy lemon filling. I'm going to start with my simple short crust pastry. So I'm starting off with some plain flour here, and I've got some sugar with a pinch of salt that's going to go in. Now this pastry works if you want to do savoury tarts, in which case you don't need the added sugar, but because it's a dessert, it's nice to have a little bit of sweetness to it. I'm just going to mix that through and then go in with my butter. Now with all pastry, it's important to use cold butter. So this is straight from the fridge, and I am using unsalted butter because I prefer adding the salt myself. And just before I mix the butter through the flour, I'm going to add some lemon zest. I love doing this with any sweet pastry I'm making, but because I'm making a lemon tart, it only makes more sense to put lemon zest in. So now I'm going to rub the butter into the flour using my fingers and thumbs. And what I'm doing is picking up the flour and then rubbing the pieces of butter through my fingertips and gradually breaking it up. I'm going to keep going, and what I want to achieve is a sand-like consistency. You can of course do this in a stand mixer or a hand mixer, but this is my Back to Basics series where no mixer is needed. So after a few minutes of rubbing the butter through, you get a fine sand-like consistency. You're basically avoiding large chunks of butter. And now I can go in with my egg. So I have a large egg here which weighs 60 grams. If you're using a medium egg, which usually weighs around 50 grams, you can top up with 10 milliliters of water to make it 60 grams. And that can go straight into the flour and butter mix. And I'm just going to use my fork to start mixing it through because I don't want my hands too sticky. But once the majority of the egg is mixed in, I'm going to start going in with my hands, just with a simple scrunching action, until a dough is formed. So I like to clump together the majority of the dough in the bowl, and then when it's mostly together, I'll tip it out onto the surface and continue to knead it together. So I'm not exactly kneading the gluten like you would do with bread, I'm just making sure that the dough has all come together and the butter is fully mixed in. After a couple of minutes, you should get a nice smooth dough, and now it's time to refrigerate it. And as always, I'm going to squash it flat rather than refrigerate it in a ball to make sure it chills nice and evenly. And wrap it in cling film and refrigerate it for about 20 minutes for it to firm up. So the dough is nice and firm and ready to roll out. I did actually leave it in the fridge a little bit too long, so my dough is a little bit on the cold side, but with a little bit of work, it's becoming more pliable. So as always, with rolling out biscuits or pastry, you want to dust your surface with flour so it doesn't stick. A bit on the top as well, and yes, that's right, I don't have a rolling pin with me, so I am actually using a wine bottle. I'm just proving how easy it is to make delicious desserts using extremely basic equipment. So when rolling out pastry, it's important to keep rotating the pastry. So I'm rolling backwards and forwards a couple of times and then rotating. Not only does this keep the circular shape, but it ensures that the pastry rolls out evenly. I truly believe you can't get thin enough pastry, so you want to roll it out as thinly as possible, only to a couple of millimeters. Now the best part about this dough is that if you need to patch up any cracks, you can do so with some extra dough like I'm doing here. And then I just like to roll on top of it so it blends in more. Now depending on what you're lining, depends on the shape you're aiming for. I've actually got 4 small tart rings, so I'm going to divide this dough into quarters, but the same recipe works for 1 large tart or a rectangular tart tin, so you want to roll it out according to what shape tin you're using. Once I cut the pastry into quarters, I'm going to roll it out a little bit more to ensure it gets super thin. When you're using mini liners, it's important to get the pastry really thin because when it comes to putting the pastry in the tins, it squashes a lot more than it would do on a larger tin, and therefore you get thicker pastry. So I've got this pastry really nice and thin now, so I'm going to line my tin. I'm carefully going to drop the pastry into the tart tin and push the pastry all the way into the sides, and using my fingers really squeeze against the tart tin to ensure that it's properly lined. I'm going to remove the excess pastry using my, rolling pin or wine bottle, and then squeeze the pastry against the sides one more time You want to make sure that the pastry is really tucked into the corners, as this avoids shrinking the pastry when it's cooking. Now, a little cheat for you, if the pastry needs patching up, you can do so now. So I've got a small hole here and I'm just going to take a little bit of excess pastry and squeeze it into the side. Just make sure it's properly squeezed in, otherwise it will just fall off once the pastry's cooked. There's a couple of taller pieces here, so I'm just going to cut that off with a knife. And there you go, perfectly lined tin. Now, one last thing which is really important, you need to dock the bottom, which basically means poke it with a fork to avoid the bottom from rising when it's cooking. And I'm going to repeat that for the other 3 tins. Once the tins are lined, they need to go back into the fridge for a further 15 minutes to firm up. This will help keep the pastry's shape once they're cooked. So I've got my lined chilled pastry tins here, and now we're going to blind bake them, which basically means cook the pastry without the filling. So here I've got some squares of baking paper, and I like to scrunch it up before I put it into the tart ring, as I think it molds to the shape better. And then you want something to weigh the paper down. So if you have baking beans, by all means use them. I don't, so I am going to use rice, but you can use any dried bean that doesn't get affected if it goes into the oven. So I'm going to fill it right to the top, and now they're ready to cook. So the oven's been preheating at 180 degrees Celsius, and these are going to go in for about 15 minutes until I start to see the edges slightly browning. So the edges of my pastry have started to brown, which means they're ready to come out the oven at this stage. And I can see that they're ready when I lift up the baking paper. The tart is starting to cook underneath as well. So if you think your pastry is a little bit on the paler side, which I think mine is, you can put it back into the oven for a further few minutes, just to brown up slightly. Because once the filling goes on, the pastry won't cook that much, especially on the bottom. So I'm going to put them back into the oven for a further 5 minutes. And there I have perfectly cooked pastry. So you just want it so the pastry is dried, and now I'm ready to make the lemon filling. Now this is a cooked lemon filling, and my good friend Matt actually gave me his recipe. Now Matt's got an online baking school, so if you're interested in learning more intricate patisserie desserts, then go ahead and check out his school. I've put all the details below. I have simplified his recipe very slightly because I've obviously only got basic equipment, but it still comes out absolutely delicious. I've got my eggs in a bowl, and to the eggs I'm going to add the sugar. Now when you add sugar to eggs, you want to mix straight away, otherwise the sugar starts to burn the eggs, especially the yolks. So I'm going to whisk that together and get them a bit lighter in colour. Once the eggs and sugar are fully incorporated, I'm now going to go in with my cream and slowly mix that in. And now I'm going to add the lemon juice and zest, which really gives this dessert the lemony kick. Now what can happen here, which it did with me, it looks like the mix is curdling. But if you continue to whisk vigorously, it smooths out pretty much straight away. So once again, it helps using the whisk. So you can see that there's a layer of foam on top of this mixture, which we really don't want. So I'm just going to get a spoon and skim off the very top and take off this foamy layer. And that is the lemon filling done. So now it's time to pour into the tart cases. The only pouring device I found was this coffee maker, but anything that pours does the trick. And you want to fill the tarts up as full as possible, so right to the top of the tart cases. I've also turned down my oven to about 160 degrees Celsius, so much lower, because these tarts come out the best when they're cooked slowly at a low heat. Another trick of filling up your tart cases is to actually do it at the oven, because this next part can be a little bit tricky. You want to now take this over to the oven and bake them for a good half an hour to 40 minutes, maybe longer if you're doing a larger tin, until the filling is just set, and of course without spilling the tray. Once the lemon tarts are cooked, they'll look something like this. If you shake the tray or shake the tart tin, you can maybe see a slight wobble, but the outer edges have just set, so they are cooked to perfection. Leave them to cool completely, and then I like putting them in the fridge to set even further for a couple of hours. And that is the lemon tart done. So once they're in the fridge, they're completely set. You can see the pastry has been perfectly cooked and the lemon filling is set as well. And of course you can leave them plain if you want, but I'm going to decorate with some piped chocolate. So I've actually got a whole YouTube tutorial of how you write in chocolate and create patterns on top of your dessert. So if you want to try this out, this is a great excuse to. And you can get as creative as you want here. And there you have it, my back to basic lemon tart. Perfectly cooked pastry, zingy, delicious lemon filling. What more can you want from a dessert? Stay tuned for more back to basic recipes, and don't forget to tag me in your creations, and we'll see you soon for more tutorials.